Recording in progress.
For those of you all who don't know me, I've been in this community since the mid-90s, but I've only been in this position as Director of Planning for 10 months. So excited about this. I'm excited about having this joint meeting with our community. Apparently we haven't had a joint meeting since before the pandemic. So it's nice to have everyone here. And I'm really excited that we're having this joint City County Planning Commission talking about this very important topic. Climate change, of course, is an existential issue that we face as a community, and we have to do something that's broader than just our individual jurisdictions. So I'm excited to have this opportunity. Very excited to hear what the Planning Commission has to say. For tonight's meeting, we set aside roughly about 2.5 hours. In a second, I'm going to ask Chair Missel to convene the County Planning Commission and Chair Mitchell to convene the city's Planning Commission. If you need to, bathrooms are back towards the main foyer right there. I think the ladies is in the one and the men's is just past where the big glass wall that's beyond. I think it's a joint public hearing. We're here for the time for the Planning Commission to speak. We won't necessarily be taking comments from the general public, either online or here in the room. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Missel, and we can go ahead and begin the meeting.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. So I will officially call to order the Albemarle County Planning Commission meeting for October 29th, and I've been told I can simply acknowledge the members of the Planning Commission present. So we'll start with Commissioner Bivens, Commissioner Moore, Commissioner Firehawk, Commissioner Claiborne, Commissioner Carazana, and yours truly. And with that, I'll turn it over.
And I don't believe we've got a full house as well. We've got Commissioner Rutger, Commissioner Stolzenberg, Commissioner Dranzio, Commissioner Soliates, Commissioner Yoda, and Commissioner Schwartz. So we are in order. It's my and Commissioner Joy. You are hiding behind her.
Well, thanks. Michael asked me to prepare a few comments. I have about 25 minutes of comment to start with. No, I'm kidding. No, but I'll just kick it off. First of all, it's great to see you all, to meet many of you for the first time. We oftentimes get in our little silos where we're working on our own projects in our own spaces, whether it's the university, the county, the city, or others. This is obviously not one of those subjects that we should be siloed in, right? This is, I think, the Resilient Together is truly a perfect conversation, a perfect title, and I'm really looking forward to having that conversation together today. I will just say a couple of things just from a matter of structure. I think we're thinking that this is really just a workshop format, so relatively straightforward and informal. I think staff would prefer us to wait until after the end of the presentation to ask questions, but if there are maybe minor clarifications that we have throughout the process, we're fine to do that. We can ask that. And then just to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to share their comments, once we've heard from staff, and really just first a shout out to the city, the county, the university staff who have put this together. I should have said that at the very beginning. No pressure, but I'm sure this is fantastic. So thank you for leading us through this. What I'll probably do is just start by calling on people or asking if somebody wants to kick us off, and then maybe we'll alternate city county just to show how we're joined in this conversation together. And we'll do that kind of formally up front, and then once everybody's had a chance to say a few things, we'll open it up to more of a workshop sort of back and forth banter process. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, great. All right, well, I'll stop talking and turn it over to you all. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Commissioner Missel. Thank you all for being here this evening. Really appreciate your time and interest in the topic and Resilient Together project. So maybe I'll just introduce myself and Emily first, and then we'll do a round of introductions of our project team, just so you know who's with us in support of this effort. I'm Gabe Daly. I'm the Climate Action Program Manager for Albemarle County. one of the co-managers of this project.
And I'm Emily Irvin. I am Gabe's counterpart in the city. So I'm the climate program manager for the city, and we are co-managing this project together.
Thanks, Emily. So just a kind of agenda for the presentation portion nested within the broader agenda that Mr. Missel just laid out for us. We're going to give brief introductions to other members of our Resilient Together project team who are here from City, County, UVA. We're going to give a bit of context for why we're doing this work, for some of the local impacts of climate change that we're experiencing and how we expect those to have effects in our community. We'll talk a bit about the Resilient Together project itself, where we've been with that and where we're headed. We'll speak about the climate resilience cohort, which is a kind of centerpiece of the Resilient Together project. It's a bit of a project within a project that's funded through an EPA environmental justice grant that we were able to receive. We'll speak about next steps in terms of our work this fall, next spring, and then we'll get into some conversation. I guess we'll leave some room for questions generally about what you've seen, and then we'll get into some conversation about inviting your input on a couple of example strategies. So we're heading into the next number of months really doing strategy development, and we thought it would be hopefully interesting, fun, and useful for the planning commissions to give us some feedback and have some conversation about a couple such example strategy options for building resilience in our community to impacts of climate change. So that'll kind of close us out for the evening and have a little bit more interactive element here. So we introduced ourselves. Also want to introduce Julia Monteith and Serena Guria, who we asked to sit up at the front with us in case you have questions about UVA and kind of how UVA is playing in this process, things that maybe we can't answer about the project as a whole. But Julia, being the Office of the Architect at UVA, core member of the project team. And then Serena is our public engagement coordinator for Albemarle County. And so wanted her to be able to be here to speak as well to some of the community engagement aspects of the project. And then also would like to just point out our friends and colleagues on the side behind a couple members of the County Planning Commission, Crystal Rittervold, Director of the Office of Sustainability at the city, Greg Harper, Chief of Environmental Services at Albemarle County, and Jamie Powers, Climate Action Project Manager with the county. So thanks you all for being here with us as well. I think, Emily, it's over to you.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you again for having us. We're really excited to be here at this first joint planning commission meeting in quite a while. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our regional hazards and the impacts we expect to see from climate change. We think it's important to sort of set the table for this conversation and revisit and have a common understanding of what we're really doing here together this evening. So I'm going to talk about how Central Virginia is being impacted by climate change and how we expect to be more impacted in the future. So many folks think of climate change as a future hazard. I do think as we witness impacts and natural disasters around the globe and around the country, and most recently in our own state and our neighboring state, it is really becoming more present for people because we are being impacted now and we will continue to be more impacted in the future. So I'm going to walk through the hazards we expect to see here. Both the city and the county have done climate risk and vulnerability assessments. And so I'm going to go over our hazards because remarkably, they said nearly the same thing. Anyway, so one of our most, I think one of the impacts that we have recently felt is the incidence of extreme heat is increasing in our region. So in this context, extreme heat is a technical term. It refers to a day where the temperature gets above 95 degrees Fahrenheit in a given day. So our historical average was we experienced about 5 days of extreme heat every summer. I think we saw more days than that this past summer. I think we can think back to some really periods of really hot days and think about how that is starting to impact our community. By mid-century, we expect to see nearly a month of these extremely hot days each summer. And by 2075, we could see nearly 2 months of these extremely hot days. And so this project is contemplating how we will adapt our systems to be better able to stand that. So another impact that we expect to see in our region is increased instance of drought, periods between rain, instances of rain. We were in a drought period before Hurricane Helene visited our region, and we had 9 inches of rain in just a few days. Before that, our area had declared a drought watch. And that has a relationship with another hazard that we expect to see, which is increased flooding. So even though we will have longer periods between rain, we will have more intense rain events. So we expect to see increased precipitation and increased amount of precipitation in any given event. And when you have dryness from periods of drought, and then you experience a particularly heavy or intense rain event, the ground is not able to absorb that moisture in the way it is when it is more evenly moist, and so then you get more flooding. So the way that these hazards interact together exposes our community, our area, to this increased risk. So when all of that is taken together, we see that our seasons are changing. And so that has an impact, especially on our natural environment. We are adapted here in Central Virginia to experience periods of cold in the winter. You can see that our historical data shows that over the past 30 years, our average has been more than 2 months of days over the winter period where we get below freezing. And so that's really important for keeping pests at bay, invasive plant species. That is our ecosystem is adapted to that. And so as we experience overall warming and we see fewer of these days where we get a frost, you can see this data shows by the time we get to the end of the century, we're predicted to see less than a month of days over the winter where it gets below freezing. So that has this knock-on or secondary impact of increasing the risk of pests and disease in our region. And so everyone kind of hates when I show this slide because it's a visceral reminder, but we'll have more times of the year where these invasive pests that harm both our natural environment and pose a threat also to humans, longer periods of the year where these are active. So ticks and mosquitoes are active for a longer period of the year. Our ecosystems that are adapted to periods of cold are not as able to fight off disease, invasive species, that kind of thing. One climate fun fact I always like to share when I'm talking about this slide is poison ivy actually really thrives when there's higher concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere. So when you have more CO2 in the atmosphere, the toxins that are in poison ivy are actually more concentrated and stronger. So another knock-on effect. So one hazard that we did not really contemplate when the city and county were doing our risk and vulnerability assessments back in 2022 is wildfire smoke. The county's risk and vulnerability assessment does consider wildfire, and there's a small increased risk as we move into the future. But we didn't, neither of them contemplate smoke. And I think everyone in this room can probably remember last summer and fall when we had smoke from Canadian wildfires, smoke from other fires in the region that were really impacting our community. And so children, older folks, folks with pre-existing conditions, our homeless neighbors, folks who work outside are particularly impacted by this decrease of our regional air. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Gabe to talk a little bit about what adapting to these changes in our environment could look like.
So a couple of concepts that we wanted to make sure everyone has a shared understanding of. I'm guessing that these are familiar to many, if not most folks, but we wanted to put it out there. There's a couple of technical terms that we work with in the climate action space. One of those being mitigation, the other one being adaptation. Adaptation and resilience are often put together, so you'll see us use both of those terms. City and county both have climate action plans. Those climate action plan, and UVA has climate targets, including a strategic plan to reach goals for reducing emissions. So those plans are all focused for all three entities on what's called mitigation, or reducing the severity of climate change, okay, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then what this project is focused on for city, county, and UVA is how do we adapt? Because we didn't take strong enough action as a global community 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there are some changes that are baked in that, as folks know, we're already starting to see the impacts of. So as we engage in mitigation work, how do we also adapt to and build resilience to those kinds of impacts from a changing climate, from intensifying weather events like those that Emily just described? There's a lot of overlap between the two. So this is just a few examples to make the Venn diagram manageable. We started listing out more and realized it would be textually overwhelming on a slide. So there's lots that's not stated here, just to give examples, but there are some actions that we can take that are really focused on the emissions reduction side. They don't have much to do with adaptation resilience, and likewise, there are some actions we can take that really focus on the adaptation, the resilience side, don't really do anything for us in terms of emissions reduction. But there's a lot that we can do that covers both, that's integrative. And so that's something that we're thinking about as we move into the strategy development for our climate resilience plans, is how can we prioritize the kinds of strategies that will help achieve both results, recognizing that there may also be a need to do some that are on one side. So the next few slides, we wanted to tease out a little bit more almost like a chain of events or a kind of flow chart from these increased likelihood of hazards or increased risks that Emily was talking about in terms of extreme weather events and trends, and like how does that actually lead into harmful impacts that people in our community will experience. So we're gonna walk you through a couple of flow charts to illustrate how that might look for just kind of two hazards together. And we've got some additional ones that we can include in a slide deck we share with you all afterwards. But for the sake of time, we'll just use one. To tee that up, we wanted to show this chart, which comes from NOAA. And I think gives a helpful visual for overall what we're trying to do with the resilience work. So the chart on the left shows an example of, by the way, you could look at these charts at an individual level or a family system or really any kind of system. But here we're looking at them from the perspective of a community system in the context of climate change. So you could have a community that's kind of chugging along, business as usual, gets hit by some kind of acute hazard, maybe a hurricane, intense flooding, maybe a heat wave or wildfire. And there's going to be some kind of shock to the system, some harm in the short term that comes from that. And sometimes that community might bounce back, but it's also possible that the initial shock is so intense that even after a period of recovery, there's a permanent loss. The community doesn't quite make it back to where they were before. On the right is what we're looking to do with this climate resilience work. Okay, so if we can make investments to build resilience now, before the next big hazard or shock to the system, there will still be short-term harms, right? Short-term adverse impacts, but hopefully because the investment's up front, we can bounce back and be better off, be stronger as a community. So to make that a little bit more concrete with a couple of examples, I'll walk you through this one briefly. Emily talked a few minutes ago about the interplay between drought and intense rainfall and how those can lead to increasingly likely of flooding. And but it's not just the hazard or the extreme weather event, right? There's also ways in which some community members might be more exposed to that. So we know there are some buildings in the area that are in the floodplain, right? So that's something that might increase a household or person's exposure to flooding. We also know that having a lack of stream buffer, right, increases likelihood of that flooding coming inland and the intensity of the flooding. There might also be vulnerability that's more specifically at the household level. So not so much exposure to the hazard, but a more vulnerable situation for the family who's living nearby. So maybe an older building, less able to hold up against intense rainstorms. Just this was there was no adverse impact particularly, but recently I had a small roof leak from during one of the rain events, actually the one that preceded Helene the week before that, but had a small roof leak from that. So thinking about things like that, but if it's worse for someone in their building. And then when you combine those three, the hazard itself, potential additional exposure, household vulnerability, you get impacts, right? So you might get displaced families, cost of repairs that could be particularly financially challenging for some folks, maybe health impacts from exposure to moisture, mold, things like that. So broad view, what can we do to build some of those, build resilience in advance, make those investments from the chart on the previous slide? Well, we might do something to address vulnerability at the household level. So I think about the work that Albemarle Housing Improvement Program does in the community, that Local Energy Alliance Program also does to help out at the household level, make buildings more resilient. We can also think about a lot of work that happens in the county around stream buffers. And financing to help landowners be able to increase stream buffers on their population. We can think about how do we make sure that although there's some historical buildings certainly in the floodplain and that floodplain may be growing, how can we plan for the future in terms of making sure that folks don't build in a present or future floodplain if that grows. So putting all that together leads to something that I think Emily has alluded to previously with the fact that we share similar risks and vulnerabilities for us. For our region, why work together? The impetus for this project came out of a conversation between myself and Emily's predecessor at the city, who reached out to me and said, hey, we're doing these climate vulnerability and risk assessments. We're starting to see more of these impacts. Should we be thinking about working together between our two jurisdictions and University of Virginia on resilience planning process for the community? Because the extreme rain and flooding event or the heat wave doesn't particularly care where the jurisdictional boundary is. So that was kind of the impetus for this project. Emily's fond of saying that knowing your neighbors is the best first step, right, for building resilience for emergency preparedness. So we've been working on this partnership for quite a while now, and it's been fruitful in terms of the kinds of feedback that we've gotten from our colleagues, from subject matter experts within each of the institutions, and also from the kind of broader community that surrounds us. I think I'm turning it back over to you.
Yeah.
Next
All
week.
right. Thank you.
Talk about the project.
So I will share, Crystal and I were at a conference, USDN, our Urban Sustainability Directors Network, in Minneapolis last week, and we were there. Some of our colleagues from Asheville were also there, and they were telling stories about coming together with their neighbors after Helene, and I felt, well, first of all, very humbled that we're having this conversation as our community. But also it was sort of reassuring to me that we're coming at this work with that spirit of getting to know your neighbors as a foundational step. We're trying to live that and model that in working together on this project. And if we can just help to strengthen relationships within the community and strengthen the webs and networks that are already holding our community in place through this project, we will really be actually building and modeling resilience. So just wanted to add that. So anyway, that's what we're doing here. After we, Gabe said, why do this work together? And so we did come together to start saying, how can this project unfold? How can we do this work together? So UVA came into this conversation early. Gabe and Serena did some very important foundational work And what we're trying to do here is really use this project to convene a community conversation about building resilience to the impacts of climate change that we're going to be experiencing, and strengthen our community really in a holistic way. So our vision for this project is a strong and safe and healthy community for everyone who calls Charlottesville and Albemarle home now and into the future. And so there are some specific deliverables that will come out of the Resilient Together project. Those are climate resilience plans that will be adopted by each jurisdiction. We're going to develop them in parallel, and then for ease of local government processes, we will have 2 separate plans that are adopted. We'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about how that interacts with existing projects and documents, comprehensive plans and things. But what we also really want to build through this project is an implementation framework. We don't want this to just be another plan that is really difficult to implement, but through the project, and I hope with the systems that we help to build through doing this engagement and intense work together, we are really building a framework for investing in our community and making it more resilient. So this is our project outline. We put this star here. We are here. We are going to talk through where we've been and look forward. But the discover phase, which we kicked off a little over a year ago, we wanted to share some of the information that we have shared with you all this evening about our hazards and risks with the community, and also hear from the community how they are being impacted. We've had a series of staff workshops. We've done a lot of community engagement. I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that in a moment. The define phase is really making sure we're solid in what we heard from the community before we move on to the real exciting meat of the project, which is designing the strategies that we'll employ in our community. And then the decide phase will be really creating those plans, going through the bureaucratic process of having them adopted, and then do is where we really implement the work, and that's kind of will be ongoing into the future. And I'll talk later about how we have been learning from peer communities and how some other communities are moving from planning into implementation. So like I said, we kicked off the discover phase, the first public facing phase of this project back in October of 2023. We had a number of workshops, a few of them right here in this room. We gathered staff from across the city, the county, and UVA, and also some of our regional sort of quasi-governmental partners, the Planning District Commission, the Rivanna authorities, the Soil and Water Conservation District. Staff from those organizations also joined us as subject matter experts. We had some workshops with community organizations. We were at a number of community events, trying to just get the word out about how we were thinking about this and how our community will be impacted. So we also got some feedback that there are many members of the community who have been asked repeatedly what they want and what they need, and there's a little bit of engagement fatigue. So we also tried to learn from other recent planning processes like AC 44 and Seaville plans together to integrate some of that community input into what we have put forward in the define phase. So the define phase we started over the summer. We are just getting to the end of it, although we're going to talk about, Gabe mentioned our climate resilience cohort, which is a very important project within the project, and we are trying to, since that piece of the project is funded by a federal grant, it took us a little bit of time to get through the grant mechanisms to be able to get a cohort off. So we want to share our draft principles and goals with the cohort and with staff before we call it final. So we're just wrapping up define and transitioning into the design phase. So also during that time, we have been researching and refining a list of potential resilience strategies that could work in our community. Of course, we are not the only community doing this. We are trying to learn from larger communities, areas that have done this before. The federal government, through their Climate Resilience Toolkit, gives us a great database of strategy options from plans from all over the country. And we have been really like combing through those lists to create a draft list of strategies that are suitable for our area based on our hazards, our geography, the size of our community, the fact that we're a Dillon Rules state, all types of, the local context, what we can do in our community. So it's been wonderful to collate what we have heard from the community into some concrete outputs. And I hope that you all had an opportunity to look at the report that we published as part of the packet for this evening. But so we distilled what we heard into these 9 themes. I know a lot of you all have been doing engagement around major planning processes recently, so I hope this doesn't surprise anyone in this room that this is what we heard from the community that they really care about. And I do want to clarify, when I'm talking about reliable systems, that includes infrastructure, our food systems, sort of those community systems and hardened infrastructure systems that really support the day-to-day life and work of our community. And so from there, we took the themes and we drafted these 6 guiding principles. And these again are in our report. I don't want to necessarily read them verbatim, but we felt like these 6 items really rose to the top as things that we need to keep as our North Star as we move through this project. And then also these 7 goals seem like really good broad outcomes that if we can work towards these goals throughout this process and project, and as we move into implementation, we will really be building resilience in our community. And so what I wanted to say also is, Mr. Barnes said at the outset of this meeting that climate change is an existential issue, and it is a threat multiplier, but it's also a symptom of a deeper problem that because many of our systems are built on extraction and exploiting people and the environment, and if we re-examine some of those ways that we interact with other people and with our environment, the place we live in here, we will really be helping to address some of those underlying causes that cause us to be less resilient. So we really do believe that if we can kind of embody the principles and work towards those goals, we will be working together to really build a community that is truly resilient. So strategy development, this is the exciting, we're standing on the precipice of this part of the project. It feels exciting. So we have been working to define this locally relevant list. We also don't want to reinvent the wheel here, and we know there's a lot of excellent plans that exist through the region, all 3 entities. So we are also beginning the work of comparing our draft list with what is already planned for or happening in the community. Because if we take existing plans and structures and either strengthen the connections on them or use them as a foundation to build upon, we'll be taking advantage of our existing systems and not reinventing them. So as we move into this design phase engagement that will be part of this next phase, we want to ask ourselves these 3 kind of foundational questions. So like, what are the midterm outcomes? What are the impacts we're hoping to see? And then when we think about the answer to those questions, what is locally relevant? Because this is so place-based, it's really important that the strategies that we develop work for this community, because what works in other places may not be what works here in Charlottesville. So I alluded to this, we've been doing a lot of learning from other peer communities. the staff involved in this project, we're all members of these networks of folks doing this type of work at the local government level. We have great connections with, we actually included a link to Fairfax's Resilient Fairfax plan in the packet. We hold this up as such a great example. We have a great relationship with some of the staff in Fairfax who are the lead on developing this for their community. They've been very generous with their experience and expertise, and that's been a great resource to learn from folks who are further ahead in this process. I mentioned we've been relying on this federal tool that is helping communities be able to do this resilience planning work. The EPA has regional plans for resilience for each of the EPA regions, and they support communities building out from there. So we've been doing a lot of learning from those who have come before us in this work. All right, now I'm going to let Gabe talk about the cohort, which is a really exciting piece of this project.
Cool, thank you. One point that I would love to call out on that last slide, if you remember from a little while ago, Emily had said that we're really aiming for our resilience plans to be structured and written to help guide implementation when they're hot off the press. And that's one of the reasons why we found Resilient Fairfax to be a helpful plan to look at, see how they structured it, see how their prioritized strategies have these implementation steps or implementation roadmaps to them. So just to call out why that one in particular we've been looking at in the context of what we hope to do with our work.
Can I say one more thing? Yeah. They have also really successfully transferred from the planning process into a program for resilience building. And that is something we are also hoping to model as we adopt the plans and move into the do phase.
So the climate resilience cohort, something we're really excited about, as Emily said, project within a project. We just had our kickoff workshop with the 10 sub-grantees of this cohort yesterday. So we're excited about that. We had an afternoon with them, got to onboard them onto the project. I think given the topic that we're discussing tonight, folks will appreciate that we had to reschedule that workshop from a month ago. We were supposed to do it on September 30th. The night before, one of our colleagues said, hey, do we have any contingency plans regarding the hurricane? Of course, not as intense, anywhere near as intense impacts here as in our neighbors to the south. But, hey, what should we do to be prepared about this? And so we said, well, if the public school districts close, we should probably postpone our workshop because folks might have unanticipated childcare issues and also a barometer of maybe there are some, roads out there that are not safe to cross. So we ended up postponing the workshop. And due to scheduling with 10 organizations, ended up being a month later, but we found it, telling and perhaps a bit ironic that we had to reschedule the kickoff session of a climate resilience cohort due to a climate change exacerbated storm. So we're really excited to finally get together with folks yesterday and kick off this key piece of the project. So it's a partnership with 10 community-based organizations that serve disadvantaged or vulnerable community members to help really ensure that the voices and folks are really brought into the project. This came from a highly competitive EPA environmental justice grant that we applied for as a team. Albemarle County was the lead applicant for that. So we're kind of the administrator of the grant, but it's a key piece of this collaborative project. And we're providing sub-grants to 10, like I said, community-based organizations to partner with us in the work. One of the things that we know that I'm sure you all know is that, local governments can have a hard time reaching a lot of folks in a community, right? There's folks who are often more able to or tend to come to, public comment sessions, to workshops that local governments hold in their kind of houses of operation. And we can sometimes have a hard time, getting a broad swath of community perspectives. So the intention with this grant is to help leverage the relationships that we have with local community-based organizations, and then the relationships that they in turn have with the folks that they serve directly. I'm going to start saying CBOs. I know we have lots of acronyms in local government, but just to shorten that phrase coming off of my tongue. So this was, we got the grant through funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. I've covered a couple of these elements. And actually kind of an example of adapting and being playful with how we're implementing the project. Originally, we said, let's give an equal $40,000 to each organization. And then we thought about that a little bit further, and we wondered if that was the best approach. And we ultimately decided to pivot where each organization is getting a certain chunk of the money to be part of the planning part of this process, helping us develop and vet the strategies that we've been talking about that will go into our resilience plans. And then there will be an additional pot of money that folks will be able to be granted through a second round to do implementation projects. And the change that we made, rather than giving each organization kind of is who knows? Maybe it's the clicker.
Of elections, Ms.
Yeah, I think it's our feedback coming. I'll carry on. We'll try and get.
Sure. So we're giving folks the option to pool funds. We know that some of these organizations, which we'll show you on the next slide, are in collaborations with each other already or have collaborated on various projects. And so we said, well, why don't we give them the option to partner in that. And so we'll see what kinds of projects come out of that. We'll be facilitating a kind of participatory design process with them a little later in this first year of the grant to come to arrive at the projects they'll be doing. So we're really excited about the 10 that we've got. There are some of these organizations that we as the local governments have worked with in the past. We know the kind of community service they do. And there's also some folks that we've never worked with where we're cultivating relationships with them. And so we're very excited to be able to kind of have that mixture and also get a sense from yesterday of some of the relationships among these organizations that already exist, as well as some of the new ones that we already saw being fostered. So I've alluded to what the kind of timeline and elements of this grant will look like, but just to put it on the page for you and talk through this briefly. Basically, there's two parts of the grant. The first part, part one or planning, is overlapping with the remaining phases of the Resilient Together kind of planning portion. So part one here will end when we have adopted resilience plans for our entities. And then part two will kick off. And that will be where that second pot of money will come into play, and these organizations will be able to implement pilot projects to kind of hit the ground running with implementing the resilience plan. So we're excited about this. And that kind of feeds back into just a few words that I'll say about next steps. Wanting to come back, Emily showed the kind of side-by-side tiles of the Resilient Together project phases: the discover, define, design, decide, and then do or implement. And so just to revisit a little bit, kind of more of a fun image of that for you here, but just to give you that sense again. So we're in between 2 and 3, kind of right on the cusp, right there. And one of the pieces I'll just call attention to again, Emily foreshadowed this, and I think now that we've gone through the climate resilience cohort, I'll say, so that's this piece, those themes, guiding principles, long-term goals are what we've penciled in based on what we heard through the project, but that we want to make sure that, this, slide back, that this group of 10 organizations also have the opportunity to weigh in on that before we, put it in ink in terms of the project. So looking ahead towards number 3 and number 4 here, the design and decide phases of the project. In the design phase, we will be taking that information that we've distilled thus far, right? The goals, the guiding principles, themes we heard, and then this research that we've been doing on strategy options and putting that together to help bring strategies into the fold that will help us meet the goals that we have. And then in the decide phase, that's where we'll actually be, doing the work of putting everything we have on paper, figuratively speaking, but literally in, Word documents where we're kind of structuring the information into a plan that we can then, request our elected bodies to adopt and that we can be implementing. There will be a number of elements of engagement, community engagement in the design phase. So also to kind of briefly call back something that Emily said earlier, where we got this feedback about some of the engagement fatigue in the community. Some of that feedback that we received was that while there may be engagement fatigue on kind of general information questions of like what's working well for you, what's challenging in your neighborhood, what needs do you have, that there's quite a bit of appetite for really creative design thinking, getting together to craft ideas. And so this phase will have quite a bit of engagement, both through those 10 organizations in the climate resilience cohort, and as well as broader community engagement that we're going to be doing kind of in strategic geographic locations across the city and county to try to get as broad swath of the community as we can. We'll also continue to meet with staff and subject matter experts from city, county, UVA, and also some of those additional government agencies that have offices or branches in the area. And lastly, we wanted to make sure to speak to just how these fit in with our guiding planning documents for city and county that we know the planning commissions are heavily involved in. So CVille Plans Together, AC 44. So I turn it over to you, Emily, to talk through links there, and then I'll say.
Yeah, so, well, one thing I kind of wanted to back up and say, so the city of Charlottesville is part of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. So we have a commitment to develop a climate action plan and a climate resilience plan. And we have already adopted our climate action plan, and you all likely remember that we went through the extra step of having that be adopted as one of the functional pieces, a functional plan underneath the umbrella of our updated comprehensive plan. So it is our hope and intention to be able to do that again for the climate resilience plan. So we really would like for this plan to become one of those functional plans that is part of the broader umbrella of the comprehensive plan. And speaking of that comprehensive plan, we also know that a lot of our final strategies will cut across more chapters than just the chapter 7 related to environment, climate, and food equity. So I think we'll hit a lot of chapters. And so just foreshadowing, I guess, for you all to be thinking ahead about the hope that we do hope to go through that process, having it be an amendment to the comprehensive.
And on the county side, we've actually had the sort of fruitful opportunity to be doing our resilience planning in concurrence with the AC 44 comprehensive plan update. So we've been able to have a lot of cross-pollination with our colleagues in planning on what they're working on as that's in development. We've been able to actually, on that theme of drawing from engagement that other colleagues of ours have done, and kind of pulling those themes, what folks have heard, into our work. We also had the opportunity to go to some of the engagement events that they've done through AC 44, where we heard a lot of themes that are relevant to the kind of work that we're doing. So that's been quite fruitful for us. There's elements of both climate change mitigation and adaptation resilience that intersect strategies across the AC 44 draft plan. And we know that the Resilient Community chapter will also explicitly integrate some of the SMART goals that we've been developing on the county side with respect to our climate action plan, our mitigation plan, and then also goals related to this resilience project. So we see those as threading together quite nicely. So let me maybe pause at this point and just check in with Commissioner Missel. You had mentioned wanting to have a little space for some kind of general questions. We have, so the next two slides are our kind of potential strategies that we put in the agenda, that we put in the memo to you all to take a look at in advance. And so I just want to check and we could go straight into those and invite discussion, but I didn't want to bypass if you would also like to have an opportunity for general Q&A. So what would what's most appropriate there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think it'd be great to have maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes if we need it for Q&A right now. Just because if everyone else is like me, I've got a bunch of questions that I'd love to throw out there. But why don't we start? I'll just start on this side. Julian, do you want to kick us off with questions if you have any?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation. At some point, Dave, if you would, it would be helpful to understand how the climate action plan that you developed that we saw in 22, how that fits into this, and because there were certainly a lot of potential deliverables there. I'm going to have to do it now, but perhaps at our planning commission. I was struck in your introduction when you laid out and you just sort of completed the circuit on that, on your 10 partners. And while I can appreciate your 10 partners, and you sort of describe them as being your subgrants, 10 community-based organizations that serve disadvantaged community members. And while no one in my seat is going to talk badly about organizations that treat disadvantaged members of our community, I would, of course, like to have a bit more shakedown on what does that mean, because if I look at some of those individuals from where I stand in other hats that I've worn, I don't know how effective they are in doing what you want them to do. And so I would just place that there. The other thing that I think is it was questioning me, if you're looking at how do you bring together a group of people who are going to help you think through the design of what this might look like. There's no one from the for-profit part of this community who will be the individuals who will have to adopt this. And so I don't see anyone here that says, why aren't we bringing in sooner than later? And I'm sure there are people saying, they have a mistrust for the for-profit people, but they're the people who are going to do it. The county and the city have no levers to make those entities do anything, except that they want perhaps a different bit of shading on there. I don't mean shading as in trees, but a bit more density or something on a piece of property. That's where perhaps the leverage comes there, or the conversation comes in. But if you're thinking that this is a positive for our jurisdiction, but I feel as if there's a significant gap in not being able to include some people who are in this for them, who are actually going to be the ones who are going to have to build this into their process. The other piece that I would also suggest in being inclusive is that I thought this is an opportunity. We hear this at times, certainly in our CACs, those of us, I can't speak for the city, but for the county, as the community advisory groups, and I always mess those up, and someone has to always help me through that. There are opportunities for our young people in school who are absolutely dreaming passionately about how do we do this. And so I think there would also be an opportunity for you to reach out to the various schools here and sort of perhaps bring a couple of them on the students, not the teachers, but the students, to bring a couple of those individuals onto your planning, because I think you would get a different level of engagement that I think is purposely looking to the future.
Great. Any questions specifically? Why don't we go over to Michael Joy? Michael, do you have any specific questions?
Well, I had a comment. There's kind of two that I want to throw out. And the first would be, I know that we're working towards a roadmap to complete this study. It's sort of, you're just kind of a third way in the process, but it'd be interesting as you're sort of developing what the deliverable is to understand that it itself has to be resilient, this deliverable, and that there's sort of a framework that's put in place that this could be an ongoing conversation and be amended and be adapted as, information comes online. So that was just one comment. And then the other one, trying to just look at the climate action plan, and it may be redundant with that, but, what conversations are being had with some of the, Commissioner Bivens was saying, with some of the for-profit or some of the large utility providers or some aspect around, is there an effort to kind of get collaboration and to get on the same page with similar priority sets?
Can I, is that a comment
That's
or can I speak to it?
Yes.
So we do recognize we need to connect with some of our state level agencies and our utilities, and we are working to build some of those connections. And we actually have gotten some advice from our friends in Fairfax about how to go about engaging the utilities, engaging our state agencies that may have, something to add to this, or we need to know about how they operate to really, work around them in our communities, right? I know in the county, especially VDOT has a huge impact. And so we are working to make those connections, and we are also working to try to work through our colleagues to connect with, so we've had conversations with our economic development folks. How can we really connect with the business community, because they do have important input on this project. So we hope that to do some business specific workshops during the design phase to try to get interest from across the, we would love to connect with developers in the community, right? To see how they're thinking about this project. So we're ideating how to best be able to do that. We have, it can be hard to get engagement from folks. And so we are trying to be really intentional about the asks, and so that we can be prepared to have the feedback that we're able to get from different parts of the community, have it be the most impactful for us and the best use of their time. So we're trying to be really intentional about how to do that.
I said one last just popped in was one thing that may be helpful is as this thing comes to fruition and you have a final report, is to imagine that report sort of being sort of shared with a larger regional area where they could then adopt components of it, but sort of making it almost like a series of plugins that could, different areas which may not have the municipal oversight or the deep resources could sit there and sort of take it and sort of adopt sections in a way that at least have some guiding principles that could help guide their decision making. That's all.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Thanks. Question?
A little bit. I have some questions about the potential strategies, but we'll save that for afterward. In the meantime, the first comment is I appreciate the long-term goals. It's a really nice list. I put a check mark by all of them. And I do also appreciate that this is meant to be more about adaptation, this project's focus, rather than say mitigation, which is why I was kind of had a moment when I saw that the primary resilience strategy is greenhouse gas reduction, which is mitigation. And I mean, we could be carbon neutral tomorrow in Charlottesville and Albemarle County, and it's still going to be 30 days a year that are over 95 in 2050. I mean, I don't want to say like we shouldn't do some things, we should, but I feel like if we let that take up the air in the room of the primary strategy, then we're going to miss out on the sort of social things and the actual adaptation things that are much more necessary. So that just feels like some of the other pieces around communication, collaboration, around strengthening our backup systems and electricity systems and water systems and so on would strike me as being more important if we're talking about adaptation rather than mitigation.
Yeah, maybe just briefly. So, and recognizing that we're just entering into the strategy development. That the reason we made that the first guiding principle of kind of how we think through this is certainly not to have that kind of take up all the air in the room of the actual strategies that go into the plans, but recognizing that with each kind of increasing year of emissions, we're making that problem worse and making the adaptation and resilience work more difficult.
Sure.
So it's sort of like the first and best thing that we can do from a resilience perspective is to drastically reduce emissions now and flesh that out with strategies that are more aimed at just kind of like putting up bulwarks against storms to come.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah, to build on that, I'm looking at the goals. I mean, maybe it's a matter of just prioritizing. Like, it sounds like the communication and collaboration is probably the most important to get what you keep talking about, needing more information and creating this, getting everyone involved. So maybe it's just a matter of like visually ordering them so that that's like, hey, we're doing this. And then working, admissions is one of the many, things that we're working on. It seems really well thought out. Awesome that you all are working together. I think I was interested in the grant and because it's allowing this other, kind of bringing more people together and maybe finding more opportunities. Maybe it's with schools, like finding money, honestly, like finding opportunities like you already did, and tying them to some of these goals so that when we get to implementation, it's not just like, it's that each strategy might have like, here's 10 things we could apply for, assuming that that's all going to be coming out hopefully, in the next few years, hopefully more funding for that. So just encouraging that to be like in the lists, like amount of money should be there so that I think it also helps when talking to communities, having the money up there so that people can help figure out like, oh, okay, if we do this, maybe we can't do that. Just sort of like, sometimes we leave that out and then people are disappointed because we choose something else and they don't understand why. So I hate to say it, but just adding the dollar amounts in there.
Yeah, as we think through those implementation roadmaps, it will be important to sort of think about how much this cost.
So
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
I'm not going to take up any space right now, just
All right.
wait for strategies.
That's good, Rory.
I guess sort of quickly, I guess I'm a little curious how, or to what extent data gathering or analysis of existing data factors into this. And we have these vulnerability assessments that sort of get into that. But, I think about like the dam study that the county's doing and how there's all these private dams and stormwater systems throughout the county that like nobody knows anything about. And like how many, culverts are there that are vulnerable to being washed out, like that one in Ivy a couple of years ago, and getting like an inventory of those as a method of prioritizing the different strategies that we come up with. Is that part of this process or is that a leader step?
Greg, could I actually ask you to just speak briefly to risk factor?
Sure. I may have been the one that was talking about the dam study and drainage infrastructure management program. So the risk factor is a company, First Street is what they're called. They produce data that we did purchase recently. So the data includes like flood data, both today's risks and risks in 30 years based on different climate scenarios. So heat, smoke, other risks like that. So we are looking to receive and consume and digest and disseminate data to some extent. We're relying on the vulnerability assessments that were done, as you mentioned, and through different programs that are being administered already from the county and city UVA, like the drainage infrastructure programs. I mean, those are obviously more data intensive. So I think, that's my thoughts about, how we're using data. I don't know if you wanted to build on that, Gabe?
Yeah, that's great. Just to say that the one thing that's helpful about the risk factor data, by the way, the package that we got from them has city and county. Sometimes you get data sets and there's like, the county's vulnerability assessment has a donut hole in the center. So for this project, we were able to get both. And a lot of the data in that data set is much more spatially refined than some of the maps that you might see in the county's vulnerability assessment, for example. So we're hoping to use that more refined, updated data for the strategy development.
And Roy, I can also share. So the city has a flood resilience plan that has been adopted by or approved by DCR. So that has a list of projects in it that we can apply for funding through the CFPF fund to, actually get funds to do some projects that have been identified through that. And so we imagine that plan will relate to this one. That would be part of the implementation roadmap, right? Like take our plan that's been approved apply for funding to do the projects. So on the city side, that is in place for flooding specific.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Lonnie.
Yes, yes, it strikes me that there's considerable overlap between addressing climate change and one of the world's other great crises that's occurring, which is policy and extinction. You know, we're massively losing biodiversity on a worldwide basis. And I know Albemarle County has a biodiversity action plan. You know, I think we stand apart by having that in our county. You know, to what degree are we, well, first let's say there are some localities that have gotten their addressing of climate change horribly wrong. You look at Chesterfield, for example, who approved a massive solar project that actually is going to wipe out several endangered species in Virginia. So that's how you get addressing climate change wrong. So what are we doing in Albemarle County, you know, working with maybe and Charlottesville for that matter, to make sure that we're not just addressing climate change, but also looking at the biodiversity aspect as well?
A great question. Couple brief thoughts, and I know wanting to make sure there's time for everybody. So there's one of the things that we've talked about in our strategy development is at some point we'll need to prioritize those strategies, right? And so one of the ways that we want to do that is by bringing in other factors and thinking about, you know, what kind of multiple benefits at once is a strategy able to give us. So there was that slide that Emily showed that talked about kind of climate change as, you know, an incredible challenge and also a symptom of sort of deeper challenges, including, you know, extraction, exploitation of environment that I think touches on biodiversity and species extinction. And so one of the things that we talked about is having that kind of root causes mindset as we evaluate strategies that can be beneficial, that we want to, you know, prioritize for this work, is to actually, you know, kind of maybe score or maybe check off, notate somehow, like what strategies are things that, you know, are really going to be helpful cutting across those multiple challenges that we're facing. And then what are strategies that maybe, you know, because it's a climate resilience plan, to Mr. Moore's point earlier, you know, we may need to include some strategies that have to do with like backup generators, for example, for critical facilities that aren't able to accommodate, you know, rooftop solar. But of course, that's something that's only solving one problem and in some ways contributing to the other. So less of one that brings the multiple benefits at once. So that's one element. And a second element is I think I've had the opportunity to work on recent projects with colleagues in community development on some of the county's current policy making that really try to thread that in ways that maybe other communities haven't, you know, been able to quite as well. So, you know, thinking about how we can make sure to prioritize biodiversity protection and even increase as we also, you know, promote clean energy in the county. So it's ongoing work, but I think those are a couple of the ways that we're aiming to do that here.
Question. Philip?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, very briefly, I will let you know that slide that showed the progress in Charlottesville and said forthcoming zoning ordinance caused 6 people at the side of this room. That's very small panic attacks. Yeah, so just because it's not forthcoming, it has come, it is here, it is working. Did I not know something? So that's that. To speak to a slightly larger and sort of a slightly larger from a greater height, my interest may be less in the specifics of what we do, but the strategy of how we implement it. Because at the beginning we talk about we don't want this just to be another plan. But my concern is, and my thought is that we need to be mindful of developing an implementation strategy even before we've got the plan fully formed, or else we're gonna find if we're not mindful of the process of the implementation and how this is gonna roll out and what it's gonna look like, I think we could end up in sort of a frozen, constipated space where some of this just doesn't get done. So I'm a little concerned about that. And I think that sort of probably deserves some serious thought on how we can look at that. And then to follow up on Mr. Moore's comments on greenhouse gases, yeah, I mean, it is easy, it is a measurable that's easy to measure, right? But again, it's obligatory. It doesn't actually change anything about climate or the environment in the city of Charlottesville or Albemarle County, because we're not even a drop in the bucket. Yeah, and so, I mean, it's obligatory because we want everybody else to do it, but yeah. Oh, well. That's pretty much all I had, but my main concern is that we actually are able to implement this and we spend some time and resources on coming up with a strategy, with a capital S strategy. And if we have to pull somebody in to hire somebody to sort of talk about strategy, maybe we do that. Maybe, I don't know what our internal resources are for that. That's fine.
Good point. Emily and Gabe, I just want to give you a chance to respond a little bit to that because I had a similar question. And if I could just kind of riff on that for 1 second. In addition to how we do it, how do we measure it? So once we're doing it, how do you actually then say, yeah, we're doing the right thing, or we need to, kind of change direction in a couple of places here? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. I mean, I feel like that is certainly something that we are aware of as the project team, and as we work on strategy development, that's a critical piece of it, right? And this is also something that we run into a lot in in the mitigation side of our work, right? Like,
yeah.
I can say we are, we just on the implementation or on the mitigation side, we just gave our first kind of report out on how we're doing on implementing our climate action plan.
Right.
And it is hard to measure each item on our work plan that we have been moving forward discreetly with, like, how many tons of carbon did we reduce, by any given action. So that is a difficult part of this work for sure. And so it's something we think about a lot and we'll be thinking about as part of our strategy development. I know that's kind of not a great answer, but we're just not quite there yet.
It's probably because there's no D word that measure. How do you put a D?
Yeah, so we do give some service to, measurement and verification and building that into the do phase, right? As we build out those implementation roadmaps. I mean, one of our guiding principles is these must be actionable strategies that we developed, right? So at this phase in the project, we felt like that was a critically important thing to put forward. This is a guiding principle. We are not going to develop, like, if it is not an actionable thing that has real, tangible, real world impact, it won't end up in the final plan. So that's how we're thinking about it from where we stand now.
A second piece that we are planning to do, the conversation began recently with it, so I don't have like a document to show for it, but although you actually showed a bit of it on one of our slides, is actually putting out logical frameworks for all the strategies in the plan. And when you talk about metrics, when you talk about metrics doing action in the real world, there's always going to be that element where you have, the project you do, the outputs, short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, and then unless you're really lucky, there becomes a dotted line to long-term impacts. And so you can conjecture about long-term impacts, but often being able to measure definitively the through line from one all the way to the very end is something that becomes sort of cost prohibitive or data possession prohibitive. But that piece of building out the logical framework or logic model, so there's a clear understanding of what is the theory of change of this strategy and how is it going to have the impact that we hope it will, is something that we plan to build out for the strategies in our resilience plans. So we're at least one, forcing ourselves to think through that with our colleagues, and then two, being transparent about those assumptions.
Yeah, I would just add that we're not there yet. I mean, remember, we're just going into design, so we have to know what it is that we're going to do before we can figure out how to measure it.
Yeah,
So
great, thank you. Just cognizant of time, Corey, not to rush you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I just want to say thank you, and I hope that this collaboration becomes more of an annual norm than once every 5 years. So I'll start off with saying that before I forget. My first question is not intended for you to answer right now, but something to think about as the process matures. And what is the cost of doing nothing? And there's signals of that. I did a Control F, and on page 170 of the county plan, ordinarily I wouldn't read 170 pages, right? So I found it there. But that needs to be pulled up to the top. And maybe it's not always financially, it could be even life expectancy. Like if we do nothing, life expectancy in this region changes from 72 to 69, whatever it might be. But I do think that economics and health are two really important points that measures the vitality of a community. So that was my first comment. And then just to piggyback a little bit briefly on what are we going to measure and understanding where we are in the process, understanding it's premature. But I do want to push back a little bit on the building performance piece because for my day job, I work for the American Institute of Architects, and there's over 1,500 firms across the country measuring progress. I get the by the reports numbers annually about the impact that it's making. I think it would be negligent for us not to have that be a key focus area, the greenhouse gases and buildings. And then secondly to that, just give thought to how we might communicate our progress to the community. I think that's going to be really important. And I love the fact that Gabe said a theory of change, right? So maybe that's a graphical image that says, if we test this, we expect these outcomes. How does that start to look graphically so we can share it externally and internally? Because I think you will need a theory of change. It's such a big problem, right? That there is no one solution. So you have to have bite-sized chunks. Test this, it didn't work, so we'll recalibrate, we'll do that, right? So those are my two comments for now, and I'll hold on the rest until we get to the other part of the discussion. Thank you.
Wow. Very grateful to be here. This is exciting. This is important work. Excited to see it. That thus ends my positive things that I say.
Thank you, Lionel. Next.
I'm very excited to see equity as a piece here. That was a crucial part of the Charlottesville Plans Together approach. We call it equity lens. I'd like to hear more about how that will be a part of this. We lean pretty hard on the Virginia Equity Center as a resource on that. I don't know if you're doing that, but if you aren't, please do it. They're incredible. Housing was another essential piece of the Charlottesville Plans Together process. I didn't hear it, although I noticed some things about the 10 organizations that were listed, although not CRHA. And I had questions about emergency housing and how you're thinking about that. Regional transit and transit-oriented development, I don't see that, but that will be, to my knowledge, essential in hitting the land use and climate things we're talking about way outside of the chapter, but it's big. Climate impacts of permitting infill estimates. Let's go getting to measures. Do we know what will be the effects of doing these changes? I don't. And just, we've been having troubles with legislative authority to police this changing climate. Our rules are old at the state level and we are constricted within them. It's gonna take us a long time to fix that, but I'd suggest legislative reform be part of this. Great. You can respond or not.
Oh, thank you for your comment. So yes, all of those elements that you mentioned are strategies that are in that draft strategy list, thinking about density, thinking about transportation, thinking about housing. Those are all things that came up. We tried to include some of those words in our report to help signal that those were very important things that came up during all of our engagement that we did during the Discover phase. Of course, housing always rises to the top for many folks in this community. I will share also, we are
try to be active at the state level legislatively through our professional networks. And Crystal and I and Gabe and Jamie and Greg are members of the Virginia group of local government sustainability folks doing this work. And we are learning together how to, think about advocating up for things that will help us in our jurisdiction. So, and there's several key actions in the climate action plan that are related to state and even federal level advocacy. And we know that's going to continue to be an important piece of the puzzle and lever to hopefully pull.
Thanks, please.
Thank you, Emily and Gabe, particularly for bringing this to us early on in the process, right? So as Julia mentioned earlier, you haven't gotten to the design piece yet, so this is great. And actually, I mean, a lot of great questions already. Some of them very similar that I had. But you mentioned something, Emily, early on. You said you were recently in North Carolina. And so I was just wondering, were there something that you, and you did mention a couple things, particularly how neighbors were helping neighbors, right? I was just wondering more holistically, were there something that you gleaned there or that you have been talking, I'm sure there's conversations going on, right? I mean, this is very fresh, but it's not new, right? We have experience here in Nelson County, Schuyler. So we have very relevant local experience with very similar type of disasters. Just wondering if there's something that maybe caused you to pause and say, well, did we think about that? Did something change? Or maybe reinforced some of your thinking. I just thought with this recent experience with Helene, if there's been some retrospect.
Yeah, so, well, just for the record, I was in Minnesota with colleagues
Oh,
from
sorry.
North Carolina. I was not in North Carolina, just to correct the record, but with colleagues from North Carolina who were sharing their experience. Oh my gosh, it was so interesting. I mean, it's very fresh for them. One of the things that they shared was it was so shocking to be completely cut off from the internet and communication systems. And folks had to rely on the radio, and not everybody has a radio anymore, especially one that you can run when you don't have electricity. And so that kind of stuck with me as we engage with the community about emergency preparedness. I don't think there's a huge overlap with this about emergency preparedness. So we've been talking a lot with our emergency preparedness colleagues. They're a really central part of this project. And but as we communicate with the community through this lens, having gathering lessons learned from communities who have been so greatly impacted recently, that was something that really stuck with me, was how hard it was. So as we develop strategies in our community, it makes me think okay, so I come from the engineering world. That's my background before I came to work for the city. So sometimes redundancy is considered inefficient, right? But redundancy is a really important word when we're talking about resilience. So how can we help to ensure that some of our systems, including our communication systems, are redundant, so we don't end up in the dark, not being able to communicate with each other? That was something that really stuck with me. And also, just getting to know your neighbors. I mean, people said they really had to come together, because we can't plan for everything, right? I mean, what happened in Asheville is not something that any level of planning could have really mitigated, right? And so the stronger those systems are in place and connections between folks, like you showed that graph at the beginning, I think that's really what we're talking about. You experience a shock, but are able to come up when you have some strength.
Well, thank you. And I certainly, I mean, this, as I said, is very fresh, right? So there's going to be more and more coming out. I think there's lessons learned there that we should draw from. I'm not sure that we learned the lesson from Nelson and Schuyler necessarily. We were having a conversation the other day about building in floodplains. And so did we learn the lesson? So here's an opportunity that we have, to learn the entire region, right? To learn some lessons, hard lessons. That's right.
And it kind of answers Corey's question about what's the cost of doing nothing, right? We kind of seen. Awesome. Danny, you guys outnumber us too. I think, so just go.
I'm gonna hold my questions for the strategy. Thanks. Carl?
So I am tickled that we were getting to do this. I think Julian and I attempted to do this just before COVID, and it fell apart. So again, glad we're doing it, and hopefully we'll do it again. Let me meander through a thought that may lead to a question. I'll be quick. Everything that I've read and everything that I've heard today speaks to excessive water and excessive heat, but we don't do a lot of talking about a paucity of water, droughts. And as I read through the Arlington report, they acknowledged that not enough work, not enough thought has been done on their part as it relates to droughts. And as I read through our reports, I think we mentioned it 3 times. The word drought is mentioned 3 times in our report. You guys, in your presentation, your second and third slide, you spoke to the worry about droughts, and you spoke to wildfires. Good. I was over at the A school last week, just talking about what they're thinking about as relates to resilience. And one of the guys suggested that 99% of all the properties in Albemarle are at least at moderate risk for wildfires. And so I just want to make sure that we give a little more thought to a paucity of water. So to that end, I think that there may be value, and maybe you've already done it, there may be value in bringing the Water and Sewage Authority to the table to talk about this, because we need to understand what their reservoir strategies are going to be in light of a drought, and what their pipelines are going to be, and that sort of thing. So if we don't want to make them a fourth partner, at least make them a junior partner in the work we're doing, and be absolutely certain that we document what their reservoir strategies are going to be as we move forward.
Absolutely. Just briefly, I know that was a comment and advice for us, if it's okay, just to say briefly that Emily talked about how we've been doing this research of strategies from other places around the country and kind of calling out ones that are locally relevant, and then comparing those with, plans that we have locally, and cross-referencing those. And one of the ones that jumps out with your comment is I don't have the name of it memorized, but the drought response plan that the Water and Sewer Authority has. We've looked through a number of those strategies, and it's interesting how their plan in particular, some of their strategies are almost written like procedures. If this happens, if water level gets to here, that triggers something that we're going to do about that. And so I think that was really helpful for me to see in looking through what they have in that plan and being able to think about, okay, what do we have here that's already been adopted, that's in place that we can make sure to build on and elevate. And of course that, doesn't necessarily address folks on well water in the rural area. And so, I think just emphasizing to your point, that's definitely one of the key hazards that we are looking at.
And I just wanted to mention that for those who are not aware of this, RWSA is in a process right now that we're very involved with at UVA, which is that they're maxing out the reservoir. They're recirculating the way that water systems are going to work for our entire community. And they're building out their raw water lines. So instead of 18-inch raw water lines, they're going to have 36-inch raw water lines. So the whole system is going to work differently. And the whole point of what they're doing is building up the water infrastructure for our community.
Yeah, I'll just add that the Right-Hand Water and Sewer Authority also hired their first sustainability coordinator ever. And we're going to be meeting with that person next week. And I think that'll create a direct link to their sustainability programs.
Chair, what we're talking about, what's the response in case of emergency? And so that's more than just water. That's the fire department. That's the, I don't know what we have now, whether or not it's a unified ambulance service here, or even at the most also what we're talking about is how do those entities communicate with each other. So it's not just how do they communicate with us, but how do they communicate among themselves so that they in fact can respond in the ways that you're saying. you're suggesting that we're anticipating.
Yeah, I would imagine that, I mean, I'm thinking in my mind is simplifying this into like a checklist of these are the things, like it's power, it's water, it's sewer, it's all these other, pieces, and how then will you respond in a situation for each one of those moving forward. I just had a couple of really quick questions. One is, we talked about measurable, and I totally get that that's a ways off because we don't know yet what we're deciding, designing, and doing. I would just encourage us to think about measuring even while we're thinking about designing and doing, because sometimes, I mean, you want to be at the end, you want to have things you can measure. So thinking about that from, backwards to forwards may help you with the designing and the deciding and the doing. The other is just thinking about the funding. So we've talked about incentives. We will be talking about incentives probably in a minute. This all is going to cost money. So, we've been thinking about affordable housing for years, and, it took a while to really get to a point where the housing Albemarle, for example, had some incentive in it. Maybe not enough, but it had some incentive in it. So as we think through this, let's also be thinking about, and I'm going to ask this as a question, are you thinking about how to fund these things as well? Is that a parallel, something that you're thinking about?
I mean, that's always a question, doing
Yeah.
this type of work. I mean, I would say up to this point, I mean, we've been mostly thinking about it on the mitigation side thus far, but as we move deeper into this process, of course, that is starting to bubble up. And thinking about how can we use this project. I mean, this is a unique thing that we're doing here together, 2 jurisdictions and our university that spans our jurisdictions. We're working together. So when you think about grant applications, that's a unique structure, a unique way of working together. So we've been thinking about it in that context, like how can we sort of use this partnership to leverage outside resources? We have not, in terms of like, how much will it cost to build resilience hubs in our community? We're not far enough down the road.
That's good to know. I think sometimes, with whether it's city council, board of supervisors, having those conversations early to plant the seed into the budget process early is really important.
I think it just goes with Commissioner Claiborne's comment about what's the cost of doing nothing. And I think when you sort of frame the whole thing, it changes the mindset. This is an added cost. Instead, it's you're trying to avoid cost down.
I just wanted to piggyback on something you said. So, and actually something that Emily mentioned in terms of you want to define actionable steps. What are your actionable steps that you can take? Along with that, you have to think about what makes them actionable, and probably funding is part of it. So I just want to reinforce that as you're thinking about the actionable next steps, well, how are you going to enable that action?
All right, I think that's everyone. Back to you guys.
All right, great.
Thank you. Before we go to the next kind of portion, I did just want to see Julia, Serena, if there's anything from the last conversation of something that is on your mind that you want to kind of respond to around the aspects of your work with the project.
Yes, what I'd like to talk about a little bit is beyond what people typically think of as community engagement. We're doing a lot of work with subject matter experts in our communities. So those are subject matter experts that our staff with the city and the county and with UVA. And we're learning a lot from them because they're experts at what they do. So, and that's also really important when we're talking about the systems and those people are running the systems in our community. I really like the idea, Julian, of going to the schools. And I'm thinking about how to do that. When I was working for ZGF in Portland, they had a program citywide where firms sent professionals to schools to teach kids what architecture is and what architecture and planning does. And I was thinking we could do something like that along those lines, make it like a classroom environment, make it engaging, because I think we have a lot to learn from young people. We've also talked about reaching out to the Monacan Nation, which I think could be a really fascinating thing to do, but also very useful and obviously important in our community. So when we think about the 5-minute walk circle, the 10-minute walk circle, I'm thinking about that tonight in terms of the communities that we've already touched, and then those that we need to keep building out the network to touch. And so I think many of you have made great suggestions in that direction.
Yeah, actually, I have a meeting with tomorrow with the county schools to talk about how to actually bring these types of workshops into the county schools. And I think we could probably use that model with the city schools as well. So great suggestions, and they're happening. And I think in terms of the community engagement, we are being really intentional about creating accessible tools that we can deploy across the region, using the cohort as kind of a vetting option so that we can work with them and do like true human-centered design so that we're not just creating things in our offices and then putting them out into the community. We're actually working with the community to think through how we share information, what information we share, in order to enable people to come to the conversation as their best selves. And I think those tools, while we're specifically designing them with the cohort for their community, those tools will be as accessible to the chamber, to classrooms across the community so that we'll have the best availability of information and design strategies that really reflect the needs of the entire community. And that's really at the heart of it, right? We want it all to be, of course, accessible to you and to the elected officials. But at the end of the day, we're gonna need our community to take action and feel vested in this work. So I think that is like our intention and the skills that we bring.
Thank you both. So gonna close out our portion, and just to frame what's next, we distilled 2 potential strategies that are kind of a combination distillation of things that we've researched that we wanted to ask you all. We felt like, what a golden opportunity to have the 2 planning commissions together with the kinds of expertise that are in the room to hopefully ask for your help thinking through some challenges. So hoping to kind of shift things here, and we're really asking you all questions and interested in your conversation together and the sort of feedback, insight, wisdom that you have for us. The way that we thought we could do that is by picking a couple of potential strategies that are kind of in the mix of consideration that affect likely both, the mitigation side and the adaptation and resilience. And to just kind of put those out for you, I'm gonna share a couple talking points just framing why we chose these. And we're basically asking you to help us do a little problem solving and help give us insight or ideas on how we can proceed with some of these that are challenging. So I know hopefully you have it in front of you. I'll put them up on the board and sit down, and then I can go back and forth. But one of these potential strategies that this should look familiar in some ways. We have a strategy like this in other documents, but it's one that, because of its implications for climate resilience, we also are thinking about it very seriously in the context of this work, of elevating that. So protecting areas that provide ecosystem services, public lands management and ownership strategies, such as conservation easements, private open spaces. So this is a distillation of strategies that other localities are pursuing in their resilience plans across the country. And the framing that we wanted to kind of put out there for you all to help us think through is that, many communities wrestle with a tension between development and conservation and how to go about that. I suspect that the 2 planning commissions talk about those kinds of things all the time, or see that tension in projects all the time. And so we're curious, how we can take the increasingly extreme weather events that we're facing and try to think about a strategy like this, sort of reframing it from like these things that are in tension, and how do we balance that to, are there ways that we can actually regenerate and expand ecological health while also, contributing to affordable housing, developing in a way that brings more economic vitality. That's something that I think you all talk about all the time, and so we'd love your help thinking through that ourselves if we want a strategy like this to be actionable and not just kind of like nice lofty
Can you
aspiration.
give us an example of an ecosystem service?
Yeah, so I think one great example is what Mr. Murray brought up earlier of biodiversity. The kind, would you like to piggyback?
Yeah, actually, I would. One great example, Albemarle County, Charlottesville has the Dogwood Festival that everyone knows. But we are actually the furthest southeastern occurrence of a very rare dogwood called Cornus canadensis. There's a little dogwood that only gets like yay high and normally lives in boreal forests up in Canada. But there's a little pocket that survived since the last ice age over 10,000 years ago that's still in Albemarle County. Despite this is a plant, if we try to grow it down here at this altitude, it would die very quickly from heat. So this is going to be one of the first casualties from climate change. At the same time, despite its sensitivity to the climate, it's also a fire-dependent species. And so it lives in the Shenandoah National Forest. Right now it's being choked out because they can't do controlled burns. So you think about this, we have houses that are sort of spreading up the hill into the to the foot of Shenandoah, which puts those houses at greater fire risk, right? But it also makes it more difficult for controlled burns to take place. So this is a great example, for me, if we wanted a slogan or like a mascot for climate change in Charlottesville, instead of, Cornus Florida, maybe we should use Cornus canadensis, because that really is this great symbol of, of this potential loss of ecosystem services and biodiversity.
Thanks for that, Mr. Murray. I think another one that comes to mind for me is pollinator friendly plants, pollinator species broadly, and the impact on our agricultural systems, the crucial contribution. So this is one, and if it's okay, I'm going to put them both out there for kind of comment on both. They have perhaps some intersection. The second one that we wanted to ask you all to help us think through is a strategy such as use more compact development and other techniques to increase walkability and accessibility, increasing transportation options during climate hazards, decreasing transportation cost burden, and supporting baseline public health through more active transportation. Our sense is that pursuing this strategy appears deceptively simple. It's something that is prioritized in both of our localities' comprehensive plans. In the city's zoning update, likely play a major role in the county zoning modernization process, reflect that kind of priority. It's also something that seems like many people agree is a good thing to pursue. And then very often the kind of strategies on the ground to pursue that, like sort of mixed use, multimodal style development, folks are often say, wow, I love that idea. And then a project is proposed next door and it's like, no, right? And coming out in force against it. And so, how can we overcome some of those challenges associated with that, where maybe folks support it in theory and then don't want it when it's nearby, because of the kinds of beneficial outcomes that I don't need to tell you all about. So those are two we want to put out there for conversation. And
so I'm wondering, I get how this, for the county, I get how this would work for the urban ring. I get how this would work in Crozet. I get how it might work in Scottsville. How would something like this work in Esmont? Or,
which is interesting. So let me come alongside you. When we were at one point, we were talking about community hubs, and my sense of some of the communities not the sort of development, but the areas outside there was significant pushback on community hubs.
Yeah.
And so I was just trying to figure out, how do we even deal with the fact if there's an emergency, how do we get those people who can't stay in place to a place of safety? Sometimes people say, well, we can go to Yancey School. Well, you got to get to Yancey School. If we have, and I won't even talk about what happened just recently. Remember, folks, we had a derecho here. If you have any recollection what the roads look like outside of our the system, it was a mess. It was an absolute horror show when that derecho came through here. Where do you get people to? Where do you get them to? And so we, in our conversations, it was just like, well, no, I don't want one of those, because you put one of those community centers out there, that means there's gonna be a sandwich shop. If there's gonna be a sandwich shop, that means there's gonna be this kind of shop. And so the whole idea, I think the question you're saying, how do you sort of speak more broadly? I think it may be helpful if you say, you scare people. And I don't like scaring people, but I do think that in some sense, it's like, what will you do if the next time you're stuck? Remember, we can also remember, we had 22 inches of snow on the ground here, not that long ago. That basically shut us down. It shut us completely down. One of the reasons we're a VDOT place. VDOT only has so many plows that it can deploy. And we are a county of like 460 some odd thousand acres. I'm not trying to be a doomster, but I'm just trying to say, I think it may be wiser to look at what are those areas that have access to things sooner, and then try and work out from them, and then build infrastructure, build resilience away from those.
So I'd like to back up to your, I don't like scaring people. I don't either.
Yeah.
But, and we, on this side of it, we had an alarming amount of experience in this in 2022 and 2023. Change is scary. And I think none of this is going to work unless we've got a significant portion of the people enthusiastically on board, for all of this to have. I mean, the community at large needs to have some sort of consensus that this is an important thing to do, because change is scary and we're going to change things. And it's going to cost money. And it's really, really difficult, I think, to frame the appropriate fear in people's lizard brains for things that are going to happen 20 years from now if we do nothing. We just don't seem to be good at that. Getting pissed off because we're building a 10-story building next door, yeah, that's easy. But
it's right there.
It's right there. But to have this sort of nebulous, and then we've got this insidious group of mouth breathers who are in a position to say, oh, none of this is actually happening.
Oh, that's true.
And that's actually getting credence, right? Where it's complete crackpot and shouldn't get any at all. But there are actually people running around who think that this is some sort, thank God for the billionaires and oil company executives who, or else for uncovering this dastardly plot. Otherwise, the scientists would have gotten away with it. And I think that those are sort of larger communication strategies that we have to have. And I don't have a solution, but either one of these, we got to say 20 years from now, this is going to happen if we do nothing, as you said. Well, maybe we need to define that pretty clearly and show how things were 20 years ago. And here's the change you can see. But I think that in implementation, if we don't get people aboard that this is real and serious, and it's going to cost money, and your life is actually going to change because of it, and on a larger scale than, hey, you've got a recycling bin now, we're not going to get forward motion.
Just one thing, if I could just add to that conversation, and it is Halloween almost, so the scaring part's okay, but thinking through the opposite side of sort of scaring is education in a sense, right? So ways to answer, I think, both of these strategies. One way, and I know you're doing this, but is actually getting out there and saying, these are the benefits of open space. These are the benefits of stormwater management. This is the benefit of walkability. This is et cetera, et cetera. I think that's just once you instill that value in the residents, then oftentimes it is less scary for change because they see the benefit of it from the start. The other thing that just sort of strikes me in general about these two strategies is, we've talked a lot recently as we're looking at AC 44, that 95% of the county is in the rural areas. And, these are two strategies very skillfully chosen, I'm sure, in that one of them talks about open space, the other one talks about density. So, our development area, we collectively decided not to expand it. So we're looking at density. How do we create density within the development areas? So I'll just call that out as an observation as we think through this.
Yeah, so so bring it back there to, you know, some of the strategies. I mean, I think, you know, even thinking in an urban context, you know, we had some conversation before about the challenges of even getting green space in our growth areas. You know, because, you know, to get a piece of green space means that you often have to develop part of it, so something can be offered back as green space. So those are real concerns. I think some of the way that I think about it too is that, you know, I think one of the reasons that the public often mistrusts a lot of these conversations is because they hear the word density and they think it's going to be all concrete. It's going to be all housing, no green space, a loss of service, worse traffic, worse schools, and all that. So I think the infrastructure piece is very important, but I also think in a very narrow way, footprint is also important. And I'm kind of surprised that we haven't really looked at some of the particularly sensitive areas, riparian areas. And instead of thinking in terms of the number of units in those areas, think about limiting the footprint, saying the footprint can only be so many square feet in those areas. And I think that would do a whole lot to really change the conversation about some of these things. We also have authority to require LID in some of these areas. And I'm surprised that we're not using that. So I think that's, and then these areas, you know, are areas that, you know, are often, you know, used for pedestrian infrastructure. They're used for walking and cycling and running. So that provides you that sort of thing. You know, conservation easements don't have to just be for rural areas. We think about them for rural areas, but, you know, a lot of, you know, the Stormwater Conservation District, a lot of the easements they hold are riparian easements. And so that's another strategy that we could be doing and thinking about, you know, protecting these areas long term. So.
Yeah, just one example. We just finished a rezoning, which many of you know about North Fork. And up there, we proffered 200 acres of open space. It's in the development area. It's got 3.7 million square feet of entitled development. But we also, out of 565 acres, carved out 200 as permanent open space. And to be quite honest with you, that's mostly floodplain and critical slopes. So where developers can be looking at that and thinking about it, it's not just, oh, okay, this is convenient. Sure, we'll put that proffer out there because it makes us look good. But then how do you actually program that space? And including that in the conversation is important, I think.
Maybe we might have to go into places up further.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm perfectly fine with, I think most people would be fine saying like, okay, let's have taller buildings if it means preserving more green space. But often when we have the conversation of taller buildings, it just means taller buildings everywhere as opposed to taller buildings to protect them.
So Rory, and then I'll go after.
So I guess with regard to strategy 2, you know, I think it's easy to look at that and say, you know, you should allow more density. And I think there's that middle part there that I think is maybe easy to overlook there, but it's sort of a critical component of it. Is that you've almost in some senses done a good job of having your new greenfield developments be relatively dense and even have good connectivity and walkability within the development. But because they're greenfield developments and they're happening as by and large in that kind of second ring of suburbs around your first ring suburbs that were developed, you know, 40 years ago and are not walkable, they end up not being walkable to things or accessible to, you know, the urban center. And so you end up with this density without accessibility, which is not necessarily bad. At least it's not sprawl without accessibility, but it's not quite as good as density with accessibility. And thinking about how to remake those connections often through those older suburbs into the urban core and into other activity centers, I think is something that could use some extra thought.
To zoom out a little bit. The two potential strategies, as I read through them, I got through the packet and the guiding principles. I'm like, okay, these are mostly very good. The long-term goals, I'm like, yeah, right. And I got to the two strategies. I was like, these are not the strategies that helps us get to those goals. These are just status quo strategies, essentially. One is keep preserving people's private land in rural areas. The other is keep building somewhat dense units in the growth areas. Those are already happening, and I don't really see how those solve our problem. I don't think we're going to land use our way to real resilience. I think we have to look at what are people's needs in the face of climate crises and other kinds of crises. And those needs are going to be food, water, electricity, safe quality homes, communications, and connections. And neither of these touch any of those directly, which is where I think we got to be putting our energy. If we talk about the first potential strategy, more conservation easements and private open spaces, I mean, I think there we can look at the rural areas and say, what do we grow? Who makes a living in agriculture? How do we do business? You know, are there profit sharing and co-op models to get people into those fields so that there's food nearby when we need it, when there's crisis, right? As things change. In the sort of urban, development area, yeah, keep building more dense housing. And also I think we have to say, how do we very explicitly build more housing, including social housing and other models of housing, so that people who work for a living can afford to live there? And that's part of resiliency as our community. There's missing things here that I didn't even see. Like for me, if I were thinking like, all right, what's going to help us be more resilient? It's going to be more robust electric and water backup systems. It's going to be a radio in every home. It's going to be more robust communication systems. It's going to be third places to build those social networks y'all were talking about earlier. So you do get to know your neighbors and people, down the street. I would encourage us with our strategies to be more bold than what feels like a little riff around the edges of our status quo.
So just 10 seconds on that.
Yeah.
Charlottesville is got the densest zoning ordinance it can have. We just spent the last couple of years blogging it to get more dense.
I'm aware.
And getting pushback by some members of the community for the same reasons I alluded to earlier. Look at the longer term picture. So to us, to strategy number 2 is a non-starter for the city of Charlottesville because we've already done it. And it's going to be years before we're going to revisit that to try to make it still denser. So strategy 2 is easy enough. It's like, okay, well, done what we can do. Now we have to think about how to support that density in a smart way. And how to use it in a smart way, which gets back to Julian's comment about bringing in the private sector, because developers, that's a conversation with the developers about what gets built.
And I would offer, I mean, we talk about the density, but we don't have a public transportation network. And I will gently suggest, I don't believe we're ever going to have a public transportation network. And one of the reasons I say that is the way our two communities are built. I don't know how I can move public transit across those communities in a way to make the dollars work. So if we took, and I always get this messed up, Brookfield. Thing, yeah, I want to call it something else since someone else has to put the right name on it. Where there's going, that whole corridor. So if I come from John Warren Parkway, up 29, come over to Burkmar Extended, come back to Ryle Road, I don't have a way to get people there. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of new housing up there. I got a lot of new families going up there. And then what comes in North Fork and North Point, I don't have any options right now for those, except for microcap, I guess, to some degree. But I don't have options for people to not get out of their cars.
Yep.
And so you got to help me with, not you, but we got to help me. Yeah. I'm sorry, Betsy, go ahead.
Well, that's just, I just thought, the start, and I didn't know if these were just things to like start a conversation, because they do seem pretty like, we already agree on all that stuff. But what I'm noticing, because we're both in the room with the city and the county, I think just creating the larger strategies and the county saying like, we can work on this stuff, the city saying we can work on this stuff, connecting them, hopefully, as best we can. So maybe that's where, like, in this whole list of things, it could be like, how does the county put a fund, to do this? How does the city do this? Instead of saying like, the city has their pros and cons. There are things to work out, and the county has their things, and they're not the same. So how do those two like support each other? So that these two, instead of being like two strategies, say like, how do these support each other? Who's doing what where? Like you guys are starting to do.
Can I offer like a super pragmatic, critical slope waivers? There's a reasonable argument to be made that inside the city of Charlottesville, we should just be like, done. We're not doing that anymore. And increasing the density.
Not doing it, meaning that you're not controlling the slopes.
Yeah, we're gonna move away from that as a general, and the idea being that we could get more density out of that. And in return for that, more people living here and more green space outside of the dense area. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad idea or a good idea, but what I'm saying is that we would need some coordination in policy and in rulemaking that complement each other. So that if we did that, there would be something else going on in the county to sort of complement that.
But even before you get to the county, let's go back to what they just told us. The steep slopes were established because they were trying to provide some protection for Earth.
Right.
Okay. So if we take them out and we allow people to build on them, that means we've got to have an integration to the stormwater management people somehow or another. That means we've also got to figure out a way what happens. Not that all developers are all good people and good-hearted people, but sometimes buildings move.
Yeah.
And particularly move.
Well, that's already. I don't want to get into an argument.
But I'm just saying how we do that.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think we're moving towards going to gross density. We're no longer going to do net density, which in fact then says to the developer, you're all smart people. You'll have really good people on your staff. Figure out how to put it there, but here are the things that you can't mess with. You have to have these kinds of setbacks and things like that.
I think what Phil's trying to get at is like, sort of the critical slopes thing aside, like, what we should be focusing on to enact that second point is building as much as close to, UVA in downtown, the employment centers as we can. And part of that is building a lot more in the city, which I think we've made a good first step to get towards, and there's probably more work to be done. That will have to take a couple of years. But you guys right now are on your comprehensive plan. And I might throw out there that I think in your method of land use planning, of having individual area plans or whatever you're calling them now, for each different place, you end up losing a bit of coherence there, where, for example, you have a ton of pending growth in Hollymead, because when the Place 29 plan was made, I assume there was lots of greenfield space. It was, way up 29, and that was in the designated growth area. So of course you put a lot of growth up there, and you end up with developments like North Fork and Brook Hill that are reasonably dense internally, but no connection and almost impossible to retrofit with the connection. And then you have your properties like
he meant North Point. He meant North Point.
North Point, sorry.
Point.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm helping you out there.
You're right at the airport and take a look at it downtown. But then you have properties like the Wetzel property and the Granger property that are right there, already basically connected, and would have been honestly better suited for that sort of much more intense growth. But those were made in different master plans that had different objectives.
Yeah, that's not my.
But it also needs. We talk about the NIMBYism that we brought. We had a really great plan for the Wetzel property. We had a fantastic plan. But the people across the street just basically stormed the ramparts and called. Some people weren't here, but those of us who were on the board, they basically called us everything but what was called on Sunday night. And so I remember.
And that was even after the developer already pushed it down.
So I think the conversation is, you're talking about how do we have community conversations with folks. to say that if you want to be, remember, we all came here from someplace else, unless you have a piece of land that was here from the 1700s, and some people do, but a lot of people don't. Okay? They don't. And so how do you have that conversation in this eclectic group? And I will tell you, I live in a place right now where the census has changed from old Albemarle to new Albemarle, and they don't want to know their neighbors. They could give a flip about their neighbor, but yet they expect the services to be like it was in Buchanan, Connecticut. It's like, that ain't happening, brother. You're living on the wrong road if you think they're gonna come and deal with that. So we've got this interesting change that's happened here, where instead of becoming more community focused, like my colleague to the right wants us to do, I'm sensing that there's this sort of pulling apart. And how do we do it in a way that allows us to be a place that's safe, that's resilient, and that can think into the future of what the things that are going to happen to us? And that's the thing that I'm really sort of struggling with.
Can I just, I'm sorry, just one quick timeout order of, or what is it?
Point of order.
Thank you.
Point of order. Ooh,
For those of you who are waiting for me to systematically go around, I'm not doing that. So Commissioner Claiborne asked very kindly, are we going to go around to each person? So if you have something to say, just feel free to jump in. The second thing I'll just mention while I'm talking is to kind of bounce off these things as we think about it, tie it maybe back to some of your potential strategies is two things. One is, I think your question was about how can our community overcome the challenges associated with achieving these aims in practice so that we can realize the beneficial outcomes. So that's one thing for us to be thinking about, how can our community overcome that? The second thing is, we've talked a lot about density and bringing density to certain areas. We haven't talked a lot about how do we think about infrastructure. So we have mentioned infrastructure, but if you've got this density and we all want, because people are coming, right? People are showing up. How do we handle that in a way that's thoughtful and forward thinking in terms of resilience? I think we have to measure where we are with our infrastructure. How stable is it? Where do we want it to get to? And how do we implement that as part of our development process and increasing density? Just to throw that out there.
I just want to make a quick point. I haven't made any points yet, so. I just for the, so I have benefit of actually been on your side of the table because I was on the planning commission. I'd even chair of it in Charlottesville. So I did 8 years there and I'm doing 8 years here and then I'm done. But honestly, too much.
NDA next.
But, yeah, right. If you listen to if you're really bored and you have nothing to do on a Tuesday night, you want to listen to us, you'll hear this commission talks a lot about wanting more density. And this commission also talks about the fact that we're not necessarily supporting expanding the growth area because we think that that'll just it's like going on a diet by loosening your belt. So we want to push the density into what we do have. Now, having said that, like Julian said, we get like the stormtroopers coming out and saying, how dare you ruin our community with this, whatever the density is. Density is a dirty word to a lot of people. When I lived in Belmont and we got the Belmont lots in, one of the things we did was show people pictures of beautiful density.
Yeah.
To get people to say, oh, that wouldn't be so bad if that lot was developed more densely than a couple single family houses, which was what the original idea was. So I'm just saying that we're all on that side. And in fact, we've been saying could you please go a couple stories higher? Like people are coming in and we're like, please go higher. And you get things like, well, I don't want to put an elevator in, or I want to make it stick built and then I can't. It's like, whatever. So, we're on that side, but I think bring it back to the resiliency part. One of the things we talked about at our very last planning commission was, how can we're not getting the density that we're putting in our comp plan. People are coming in at less than that. Some of the complaints we hear is, well, your process is so hard and it takes time and it costs too much money and I don't want to bother with it. So just come in with by right stuff. So, we were talking about what can we do to incentivize that? So putting that resiliency lens on it, is there something green that they do that they then get that sort of automatic bump up? We've done this for affordable housing, but if you put a green rooftop in your development, if you add extras, water quality treatment for your stormwater, if you make that trail connection, like making those kind of automated things that, yeah, you can slide on through the development process if you're doing the green things that we want. We don't really have incentives right now. We really don't. If I'm a developer, why am I gonna go that extra mile and do that green thing?
I think that piggybacks on you and infrastructure, which is you've got to come up with a way to induce, seduce, or otherwise encourage, that building in those areas that you've designated for higher density. Charlottesville's got that a little easier than you because we got 10 square miles and that's it. You got to do what you got to do. So, but things like is it worth it to build in closer in these growth areas? What do I get?
Yeah.
And infrastructure has something to say about that.
And I think that's gonna require some investment. Now, we're the commissioners, we're not the board, we're not the council. We haven't got the money strings.
And we're not the legislature.
Right, so the thing is that, we're going, sometimes we talk like we're on the board of supervisors, and
we realize we're
on the
not.
board a minute ago. But, point is that, we are going to, as a county, city, have to put more money in the game.
Yeah.
We're going to have to actually build, we can't just say, please give us a sidewalk, please give us a track, please give us, we're gonna have to actually start coughing up some of that money, subsidizing some of these things to make this community the green community that we want, that's gonna be more infiltrative, withstand extreme weather, be more drought tolerant, be more water conservation based. It's just gonna cost money. I'm willing to pony up, but that's just me. Not everyone likes that.
And I would suggest everybody should be aware that our center of business is actually not where you think it is. It's where he is.
Yeah.
There are more jobs up there.
UVA.
No. It's the research park, and across the street from the research park, there are more jobs out there right now, and that's slated for growth. And what did you say? They're not connected. They're not even connected to Hollymead Center. I can't even walk to Hollymead. I can't walk.
Not yet, because there's one 9/10 of a mile that needs to be finished, which will be done in 2027.
Okay, I'll be able to walk that.
Maybe bring it all back to conservation easements and open spaces. Commissioner Murray made a really good point earlier that you get these proffered open spaces in developments, and then they often are the perfect places to use for connectivity, but it's infeasible because they are private open spaces, right? You guys are going through this now with the Greenway Trail, the Biscuit Run Connector Greenway, where, these are private HOA easements and you didn't get the connectivity part of the proffer before. And that's, I think, what really kills me about this strategy is when they are conservation easements and open spaces, that doesn't even necessarily mean they're providing the ecosystem services you're asking for. I think most of your conservation easements are probably on properties that are doing the opposite of ecosystem services.
I think that's an excellent point. There's a lot of localities that require when the green space is dedicated that at least an easement is granted to the locality for that. And I would love to see us move in that direction. I think that also provides security for a lot of people because you have developments that, you have this area that's been green for a long time, and then the developer comes back some number of years later and says, actually, we're going to put houses there. And they said, well, we were all promised that was green space. Well, either it is or it's not. And it's good to have that sense of security that, this is what it's going to be. So I definitely agree with that. It's also worth noting that all easements are not made the same. The kind of easements that my colleague was talking about, open space easements, are not the same as conservation easements. And so the problem is in Albemarle County, and also there's different models of easements as well. There's, the people with the big money, the big landowners, what they do is they donate their easement to get a tax break. But ordinary people who don't have a lot of money, they depend upon a different kind of easement where the rights are purchased. And Albemarle did have a program like that called ACE, and then that was eliminated. Yeah, exactly. So the easement program that we do have is unfortunately not the kind that benefits smaller landowners and people with less financial resources. So, and then as you score things like easements, we can choose. We've done in my opinion, a poor job in the past of doing things like looking at, are we really getting the maximum value for these easements? Is this just a big area that's just cut for hay? I don't want to pay, I don't want us to pay for an easement for that.
Again, but that's not the purview of this group.
Well, it's not, but we can make those recommendations.
It's
to
the
board of
purview
supervisors.
of, as I say, if that's what you really want to do, go run for being a supervisor.
Yeah, but we can make those recommendations.
We at least need to be clear that it's not going to help with climate resiliency.
Yeah, so I mean, I think.
It may help with fire, but it won't help with climate.
Yeah.
It may help with fire.
May I interrupt for just a moment?
Yeah,
I know I
go
saw
for
a
it.
couple hands and I want to hear from folks who haven't spoken, but I also wanted to just call out that Commissioner Firehawk talked about a number of items that Serena put on the back whiteboard as potential follow-up questions for some of what you all have already shared with us. So you've started to, you pointed out, okay, these are a little broad, and you started to give us some almost more like precise strategic pathways to pursue. And Serena, could you say something about just like maybe what would be helpful with asking folks to contribute in response to those questions as new folks chime in and you keep talking?
Yeah, so in the design phase, we're going to serve up some of these great strategies that have been considered by other localities, much like the two that you're looking at today. And in the conversation, I've just been capturing some of the questions that you all are asking about how effective would these strategies be. So when we start to consider, I think in the design phase, you're not only thinking about the possible ideas, but how they'll work. And if we have enabling authority, what are the funding possibilities? How are we going to measure it? That's a design consideration, right? And what are the benefits? And then somebody said, how are we going to communicate or get the community behind it? So these are all considerations that I would want to put forward as we outlay the strategies so that not only you all can think about it, but the community, when we do these design workshops, they can be thinking about it so that in the end, we have this framework for each of the strategies and it all makes sense and we don't have to think about it after the fact because it's been considered at the table. And so a question is, what else, in addition to these considerations that I've heard tonight, should we be putting on the table as like in a worksheet or in the conversation when we do workshops with staff, with community, with you all again, et cetera?
And I would just add that if it's not clear, the difference between strategy 1 and 2 is alluding to the fact that the solutions in the county are going to be different from the solutions in the city. So we have to figure out how to make those harmonious also, right? But it's not as if you're going to have one plan that's going to apply to the very different conditions in the city versus the county that's going to solve everything. They're going to have to work together.
Julia, can I follow up to that? So, as you transition the design phase, I think finding challenge and friction about change or what people's sort of personal understandings are, it could be an encumbrance as you try to move forward. I wonder if there's a process actually for a clean slate start, and that you don't actually look at all of the friction points, but instead you just work almost just from scratch. And so you actually identify a series of 4 lenses of what does resilient community look like. And this one lens could be an urban community. These are the things you need for resilient urban community. And then you do, here's a suburban lens that shows this is some different variations, and talk about some of the and then move it to a rural and then move it to a natural. And sort of have this sort of series of sort of ideal outcomes that people can start to be literate around. You can take it to the schools, you could show this to kids as they're going out being like, hey, what does it mean to be resilient in the suburban environment? Because I think you don't want to sit there and make people feel bad about the condition they live in, that somehow they're contributing to something.
And you remember one of the last slides showed all of the different reference material that we're looking at and all of the other communities that we're looking at of different sizes. And so I think we're moving in that direction, but I just wanted to make that point. A lot of people don't realize that UVA is 2/3 county and 1/3 city, so it's primarily county.
Yeah, maybe there's an institutional lens or something, or a corporate campus lens or something that's one of these guiding things. And I think then people can sit there and start to assess, okay, so the Charlottesville complex, where are the areas we need to do more, or if you're looking at a new development.
So, Michael, I would argue that there are parts of Charlottesville that actually look more suburban.
Yes,
They look,
you're right.
they look more rural. I would say they look actually more rural, not just suburban.
And that's why I said lenses, is that the idea is that
Which would
you
work.
there's not county guidelines and city
Which would
guidelines.
work.
There's
Yeah,
a series of
Serena, so you just asked the question, what else is there that you engage community in? So I do think it's engaging the development community, right, as part of it. So I would say as much as we've heard, well, there's hear from the community every time we're going to build something, but I don't think that's actually what's limiting us, at least in the county. In a lot of the developments that have come forward, we're actually and so it's the development community that's the limiting factor in the density in the county. So how do we enable that higher density? How do we enable, adaptive reuse and infill projects in the county? I think the city has had more success with that, but we haven't, and they're just not building to that density for all the reasons that we hear, right? Different building materials, fire code, if you're high rise and more elevators, everything else is more money, right? What it comes down to. So having a conversation with them, what would it take to increase the density? I think that's one group that I would ask that you guys engage with.
And I think that the generative nature of what does it take, or what does a resilient community look like, that opens up the conversation to developers to say, oh, I think I could contribute in this way to this vision of what it means to be resilient. So in addition to the density and how we get there, I'm sure there's more strategies than we could even think of that we could leverage the creativity of the development community and other people in our area that can.
I think when you do community workshops, you could do a similar framework. You can start to identify what does resilience look like for those different constituent groups, and then it doesn't pit one against the other. Instead, they may just be different, slightly different themes.
Yeah, I think truly, to your point, a picture does paint 1,000 words. If you can show an example of something, it's really helpful. The other thing on the flip side is, I wonder if there'd be a developer or developers that might think about partnering, and maybe it's residential developers, seems like it's more likely to be that could come together and create a pilot project. And, maybe there's some incentive there, maybe there's a market incentive to them for marketing their homes or whatever it is, that we are a pilot project, we are concerned about resilience, we're teaming together, and this is how we're doing it. And that becomes a case study and also allows developers to work creatively to find ways to make things happen more efficiently. The other thing I'd say with development community, and we talked about incentives, it's easy to think, and you all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but we think about incentives as, we have to find the money for this, right? It's not always that in the development community. A lot of times it's time. And so if there are ways that we can think about and ask the development community, okay, what is it that would make things more feasible for you in terms of bringing density, in terms of achieving these resilient goals and objectives? How do we get there? Other than paying you? I know they're going to say, well, tap fees, gosh, RWSA, pigs guts, they're so expensive. Yeah.
The past record.
Too soon. But yet, and then I had one other point, but you threw me off. So one question, point of order. Thank you for that. How long do we want to go? Because probably could talk for about 7 hours. Are we thinking maybe wrapping things up around 8:15? Is that about right? Everybody's thinking yes?
I think, definitely.
Okay. Well, do we want to, yes?
I have a comment that I want to throw out before we end. But so I know Rory, you kind of touched on connectivity, and we have these different parts of the county and the city being developed, but you can't get between them without driving. And something that hasn't come up yet is VDOT and kind of our regional transportation planning and implementation process. That is a more or less oiled machine. It kind of goes on. The MPO puts together projects from the jurisdictions, federal money comes in, and these projects get built eventually, or something like this.
It's a machine at least.
Yeah, it's a machine. I don't know how well it is, but things are being built but the scale of what VDOT is doing in the region is much larger than anything the city and county are doing. Like I was looking, the last city capital improvement budget has 27 million over 5 years for all transportation investments. And I think about 16 million of them I would classify as benefiting, like walking and cycling in the city. And, $16 million, VDOT spent $14 million on one intersection that has no pedestrian, benefit whatsoever. So, and I think they're spending like over $100 million in projects, most of which do not move us closer to being a walkable, bikeable community. So I guess my question is like, so that we're not fiddling around the edges here and kind of playing in our little sandbox, like, how do you plan to engage with VDOT and an agency that spends lots of money and doesn't seem particularly interested in fostering dense walkable communities?
I mean, you should speak to that because that's actually, there's a tail that wags that dog and it's not VDOT.
Yeah, I mean, VDOT is implementing projects that are proposed by the county and the city and the MP. Well, not the city, but the city implements its own projects, or more accurately, doesn't implement them. Just canceled $35 million worth of projects, but the county sets its own transportation priorities beyond VDOT beyond smart scale, sort of directing VDOT what to do. So I think we do sort of have the right people in the room, except to the extent that nothing any of the planning commissions do matter. It's the board and council that matter, but in theory, they listen to us.
And many of these projects are smart scale funded. So there's a formula that decides, and that formula is very political. But I guess what I'm saying is, I just think that there are. You mentioned state level agencies, but I think the kind of regional transportation project implementation process, I really hope that we can find a way to direct it towards making the region more resilient and making it more possible for us to live, in more resilient ways.
Part of that is that VDOT listens to data. And so every time this project come out, in the county, people are saying, oh, the traffic count is this. And they always just mean the traffic count of cars. And so we have traffic counts for pedestrians, cyclists, runners, but we don't use it. And I think we need to start implementing that and making sure that when projects come before us, we say, well, pedestrians are using this area. I think that needs to be part of the conversation.
And I think when you talk about project origination, and I say it's not a well-oiled machine, like I think that is something that really should have a lot more focus put on it, in particular, putting a resiliency and a climate lens on it, and a broader, not just looking at where are the V-Trans needs on the map and, oh, there's a lot at this intersection. But, as I'm sure Mr. Barnes would say, looking at that broader region-wide connectivity, and not even where there aren't pedestrians yet, but there should be, and creating, those bridges where people aren't swimming across.
Mr. Claiborne?
I know it's getting late, so I'll just offer a couple of points. I don't want to be duplicative, so I'm kind of sorting through them now. For strategy one, I think the first thing that came to my mind is how do we, in that lens of climate resilience and so forth, larger scale renewable energy and the inherent tension that will occur with like land use needs, and that needs to be reconciled. And so, yeah, what was that?
You have to use somebody's land.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to want to put their land in that situation.
Yeah. But I think that is a key to getting us where we need to be, though. So that's something we're going to have to tussle with. And then on the second strategy around compact development, I want to make sure that, as we're having these conversations, that for buildings, we need to incentivize resiliency, sustainability, carbon reduction for existing buildings. A lot of what we've been talking about here is greenfield, but the data says, almost half of architecture firm buildings right now in the US is existing buildings. And so it's inevitable that that's going to be a new set of constraints that we're going to have to contend with as we're starting to flesh out our strategies and start thinking about how that might be implemented. Around natural disasters, hazards, and risk, I jotted down 4 points: preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. And so how when we start looking at those avenues, what does that start to mean for, infrastructure or site design or environmental, constraints? So just want to make sure we also don't lose sight of that piece as we get further down the road. And then lastly, I jotted down business continuity for both public and private sectors. So, we had some rain from Helene, school was closed for 3 days. That's crippling for a lot of families, right? So in terms of business continuity, how do we stay up and running as we think about site design, building design, planning, zoning, and what does that start to mean, right? When we talk about the words you use here, compact development and other techniques. Can I walk to work when that happens, right? So I'll end there because I know people are probably hungry and they want to go home. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
I just have a suggestion if it's helpful. One is, I was going to say any concluding remarks from anyone, but that could be another hour. So, you guys ever watch Wait or listen to Wait, Don't Tell Me at the end? They're like, this, that, they go around and everybody has it. So I'm going to model this and see if we can do this. Just think of your top 3 items and not like a narrative, just top 3 items. So cross-jurisdictional infrastructure considerations. That's 1 for me. 2 is education, pilot projects, and case studies. And then the 3rd is metrics are key.
If everybody does this as well as you just did, it's going to be faster than we can write it down. So I'm going to ask you all to write them down and also send them to us. But that would be really helpful for us.
I recorded and we'll have minutes. So
Awesome. Commissioner Nibbs, speed round.
Transportation, the unified transportation. Okay. And a narrative that is about the possibility of tomorrow. And a realization that even though the county does have 5 districts, 5 development districts, they are not unified and they never will be unified.
Great. Commissioner Moore?
I just think about, if we got 15 inches of rain in 2 days, what happens, right? And so where do people get food and water? Where do people get electricity? Where do we have communication and connections to do that? And if we build that now, it'll be better for all of us all the time, in addition to when shit happens.
Mr. Firehawk?
I'll try. One thing we didn't talk about is regional pathways, regional greenways for connectivity so that people could, because we can still reconnect all this disconnected stuff we have. It is possible. Just like we've done with the Urbana Trail. Incentivize green development. And then I just want to +1 that idea that I think, Michael, you said this about thinking more about not just like the county and the city, but like suburban, urban, and rural. And it's okay that we have different strategies for those different situations.
Mr. Moore? Sorry, Murray? I was
Sorry, wherever I am.
I'll speak for it.
Just as we have a flood hazard overlay, I think we need a fire hazard overlay. I think we also need significant incentives for structured parking. And then I think we also need more funding between the city and county for technical assistance so that we can get more out of grant funding, like programs like VCAP, so that we're not leaving money on the table we are now.
Awesome. Commissioner Labor?
Cost of doing nothing, articulation of goals, both internally and externally, as we strive to do this together, and then the role of buildings in the solution.
I'll be redundant. I'll just give you one, and it'd be one of the strategies that we could have talked about today, but I would put it in your mind about talking about it more in the future. We have talked about it, and that is neighborhoods, and how do we make them more resilient by creating unity and connection within them, right? So they can support one another. Commissioner Bivens talked about in his neighborhood how he's seeing it going the other way. They're not talking to their neighbors. They don't know their neighbors, and I think we can all relate to some of that that's changing. Or they come in at night to sleep there, and you don't see them throughout the day. And so, how do we do that? How do we encourage that so there's that stronger connection and create resilience in that neighborhood?
Commissioner Mitchell? All right.
Is that an option for us? We can't. Okay. I can't consolidate my thoughts on this. Okay, one thought, stupid thought.
There was some discussion that these strategies only slightly overlap. To me, these both strategies are the same. I don't see the difference between the two. I don't know if that's about or not, but it seems like you do one.
Right.
All right, I'll keep it short. Direct the real transportation dollars towards multimodal regional connectivity, focused development where hazard risk is lowest, and give people access to the rural green space.
Awesome. Commissioner Solowitz?
Wow, I couldn't write that down. It was so fast, but it sounded profound.
So terrible.
So I have a lot of ideas. I'm not going to consolidate. Land value tax, or we could call it a sprawl tax. We did it for centuries here in Virginia. It's a way of making leapfrog development financially unfeasible. You just can't do those unconnected spaces. You have to connect financially. It's not legal, but it could be legal. It's in the current recommendations to Charlottesville's legislative packet to legalize it in our region. I think would solve our transportation problems as well. The idea of missing small, we talk a lot about missing middle. There's an architect named Alfred Wu has a beautiful graphic showing the missing small, which are appropriate in rural uses. It's just gorgeous and it's revelatory. You see, you go, oh yeah, we could legalize this and it would be amazing. Please look at that. A positive vision for rural areas and then permit that by right. What do we want to see in the rural area? Not what we don't want, but what would be good for people, what would be good for resiliency, and then legalize that. Neighborhood commercial, that's one of the few things that fell out between our comprehensive plan and our rezoning. We didn't legalize neighborhood commercial, there was too much pushback, sandwich anxiety. That's one thing. That's one thing we can go forward with in the city. Hartford, Connecticut, where they looked for places that were historically allowed commercial uses and then legalized commercial in those places. It's actually kind of preservation.
Right.
That may
I'm
be
a
one
fan
thing.
of that.
Planning land use based on current and future infrastructure. That's something that Charlottesville did in our comprehensive plan. We looked at where is the infrastructure already? Okay, maybe that's where stuff should go. Eliminating dwelling unit per acre measure. We were getting a lot of great projects killed because they didn't meet the DUA requirements. So we got rid of it. It's great. Recommend. Bicycle parking mandate, no vehicular parking mandate. That was politically a relatively easy thing for us to do. Transformative, helps housing, helps climate, helps everything. Put the comprehensive plan in the capital improvement plan. That's something we did in Charlottesville over years. Staff hated me for it, but it is transformative. When the dollars go to public benefit instead of to random other directions, it makes the plan have teeth. It makes things happen in the real world stronger. Making a hierarchy of flood resilience and infrastructure. Flooding is at this level, this stuff breaks. Flooding is at this level, this stuff breaks. A, document what it is, and then B, plan to make it better. Copenhagen has done this, and I think it's a great example. That's what I've got. It helps.
Aren't you guys glad you're glad I passed?
Yeah. Needed comments. Commissioner D'Orazio, hope I pronounced it.
Sure. The mediocre bar, the great steal. I endorse Michael's basic premise of starting from a clean slate. You like that? I stole that. The second thing is dealing with community, bringing them along and grasping this you really need to pay attention to what's going to happen in 20 years if we do absolutely nothing. And third, going back to my original comment, we need to make sure that as we build this plane, we know how to fly it. And that means implementation strategy as a separate thing that we spend time thinking about how it fits.
Awesome. Commissioner Saltzman?
Yeah, I'll just say resilience hubs need microgrids, mass phone charging infrastructure, and satellite internet. And I hope you guys go talk to people in Asheville when they're less busy.
Awesome.
I also like the comment of not shaming people. I think we have, because, when we're like, oh yeah, we already know this, like just start from like, how do you live now? What's great about it, and kind of building up the partnership of everyone kind of taking their pieces of the puzzle and not the city doing everything, the county doing, everyone's got like different strategies. And then I think also just sort of using some of the most vulnerable people as a judge of what we need. Like, if you're homeless and something happens, this is what happens if you don't have air conditioning, or if you don't, like just kind of starting with the most immediate problems and then working up just to protect citizens that we need to protect.
Great.
Reminder quick, I just wanted to urge clarity, simplicity, and positivity in this process, just so I think everyone's comments are great specifics, but I think you can sometimes lose sight of the high level ones just to, this is a scary path for everyone. I mean, it's an existential thing. I think a lot of people can just kind of hold up and be like, well, it's too late. We can't do anything. So I think making it incremental and really simple and achievable, and I would imagine getting 80% of our region to do like 10% or 20% is better than getting 10% doing 80%. So I think that's usually it's important.
Awesome. Well, just a couple of quick ending things. First of all, thank you. It's been fantastic.
Yeah.
Secondly, be thinking about how we can continue to be helpful. So hopefully this isn't the end of the discussion, conversation. If you have other strategies that you want to bounce off, I don't know how we would physically do that, or email or whatever it is, but this is great. I mean, I think this is really fun to see. And then the last thing I'll mention, at the risk of having somebody in the staff throw something at me, hopefully we can do this again on other subjects and moving forward. So thank you. Yeah.
We didn't finish. We got two.
Next time somebody has to buy dinner. Thank you, everybody.
The city guy.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, thank you.
October 30th, actually.
October 30th?
Special meeting is October 30th.
Awesome. So I will adjourn the Albemarle County Planning Commission until October 6 o'clock. Thank you.
And we are
Recording
adjourned.
stopped.
Thank you all.
I don't know any other meetings about it.